Joel Fox, you like to say that you have a long rap sheet in California politics. What does
true.
that mean?
It is true. I go back to 1979, joining Howard Jarvis, who was the author of Proposition 13 and the California tax revolt that swept the country. In fact, in talking to Marty Anderson, who was economic advisor to Ronald Reagan, he said when Proposition 13 passed, it gave the Reagan campaign some impetus to push forward with taxes as a lead issue. So I go back to the beginning, working as Howard's aide. Wasn't there at the campaign, was hired just afterwards, and traveled with Mr. Jarvis around the country, worked with him on a number of other issues. He passed away in 1986, and I took over as the president of his Taxpayers Association. Had that job for a decade, and involved in a lot of California ballot propositions along the way, and even since then, but then went out on my own to do some consulting. I've been a small business advocate. I've been involved in a lot of ballot measures in the state of California, and even worked on a couple of political campaigns. Don't do that too often, but I was a policy director for Richard Riordan, the former mayor of Los Angeles, when he ran for governor unsuccessfully against Gray Davis in 2002. But then I was a senior policy advisor for Arnold Schwarzenegger when he ran successfully against Mr. Davis the following year in the recall election. So that's, and involved with also things in the Los Angeles area as well.
Has Prop 13 over the long haul been successful?
Well, if you poll it today, it has the same 2-to-1 support it had in 1978 when it passed. I mean, it did the main thing it intended to do. It kept people in their homes from being taxed out of their homes. And it put some controls on the tax structure. Now, you can talk to particular interests in California who will say it's not a good thing, but we ask the voters, the pollsters ask the voters constantly. Frankly, the people who want to do away with it ask the voters constantly whether they should go forward with a ballot measure to do away with it, and they don't see that kind of support. The people are pretty happy with what it did.
Has the ballot, the proposition ballot infrastructure in California gotten out of hand?
Well, it's certainly being used. People think that if you have the money, all the money in the world, you can change the law in California. You can qualify a measure if you have money. There's no question you can get enough signatures. The way the system works is you have to gather a certain amount of signatures within 150 days. It depends on how many people voted for governor in the last election. That's how they determine it. And then if you gather those signatures, you're on the ballot and you have your campaign and you go for it. However, a lot of studies have been done on this, and while if you have a lot of money in the bank, you can probably qualify it because you can hire signature gatherers to get those signatures. But that doesn't necessarily mean you pass the measure on the ballot. There have been a number of recent examples where a company wanted to change the law that benefited themselves, and they outspent their opponents $18 million to $100,000, and they lost. There's been a number of examples like that. So it's still, the final decision still in the hands of the voters. And you know, they have, I think, for the most part, made good decisions on some of the measures that have come along. And it's still something that the voters seem to really relish here in California. Constantly, the Public Policy Institute of California says, well, what do you think of the ballot measures? What do you think of the initiative process? Should we change it? There's always some sentiment to change it, but then no one agrees on what that change should be. But 75% of the people say they like the initiative process. The legislature wishes they had those kind of numbers.
Joel Fox, what's your connection to Pepperdine?
I teach one course a year as an adjunct professor in the Graduate School of Public Policy. I've been doing it for 7 years now, and with my connections in the political world in California, I bring in a lot of folks from different aspects of life, from elected officials to reporters to bureaucrats, to give the students a particular slice of the real world. And they're from across the political spectrum. And last semester I had the Speaker of the State Assembly and Lieutenant Governor of California. And so I try to reach out to everyone that I can to bring them down here and induce them to come to Malibu for an afternoon, which is not a bad inducement.
Who's Zane Rigby?
Zane Rigby is my lead character in my mystery novel series. He's an FBI agent, a senior agent in his 50s, and he gets involved with a couple of, so far 2 cases, in which he has to solve not only a current modern-day mystery and a murder, but something that involves an American president, a puzzle in the past of an American president, because that's the only way he's going to solve the murder mystery. He's got to solve that puzzle involving the American president. The first one was called Lincoln's Hand, and that is based on the true story that there was an attempt to steal Abraham Lincoln's body 11 years after he was assassinated. And they actually opened up the sarcophagus and pulled the coffin partway out before they were thwarted and they ran away. Well, the people who guarded the tomb were so concerned that there would be another attempt that they moved the coffin around. In fact, someone once tabulated that President Lincoln's coffin was moved 17 times.
And that's historical fact.
Historical fact. I use historical fact as the basis of my stories and then embellish the modern day murder mystery. In fact, for 2 years, in Lincoln's tomb in Springfield, Illinois, there is a terrace, and below that terrace is, I would call it a cellar, right? It's dirt floor. And Mr. Lincoln's coffin was above ground for a couple of years, just covered with wood planks and logs and stuff. And then they actually buried him in that cellar for 9 years before moving him back into the room where he is today. But even as late as 1901, when his son Robert was still alive, they were setting up they buried him again below the surface, about 6 feet below the surface, and they set up an alarm system from the tomb to the caretaker's house. And Robert Lincoln came in and said, "That's not good enough. I want more protection." Robert Lincoln was an attorney who had worked for Mr. Pullman of the Pullman car fame. And Mr. Pullman, who wasn't exactly loved by everyone, when he passed, decided he wanted to really be protected. He was buried very deep and under concrete. Robert Lincoln said, "That's what we're going to do for my dad." So the President Lincoln is now buried 10 feet below the surface with concrete under a wrought iron fencing. And so Lincoln's coffin was moved again when they reconstructed the tomb and did this final burial. It was actually opened twice. It was opened in 1887 and in 1901 to make sure he was there. So the premise of my novel is Abraham Lincoln in his tomb, in his coffin? And if not, where the heck is he? And how come people are dying to find out?
What's the USS Houston?
The USS Houston was a cruiser. It was Franklin Roosevelt's favorite warship. He took it out a number of times, went on fishing expeditions on the USS Houston. And in fact, he took it 3 times to Cocos Island off of Costa Rica. And it's about 300 miles west in the Pacific off Costa Rica. And supposedly, there are a number of buried treasures on that island. Now, Mr. Roosevelt was a fisherman. He liked to fish in those waters. In fact, he caught a 110-pound sailfish that is with the Smithsonian today off of Cocos Island. But he went back there a number of times. And one time, he had entertained a couple of British treasure hunters on the Houston to talk about the potential of, is there treasure and where can they find treasure on Cocos Island. The Houston, unfortunately, during World War II was sunk by the Japanese in the Battle of Sunda Strait. It went down with the HMS Perth from Australia. And there are still associations today that honor the men of the Houston. There is children of some of the survivors and those who perished still have an association that goes on today. And there was a famous book called The Ship of Ghosts, which was written about the Houston. And if anyone saw the movie The Bridge on the River Kwai, and William Holden, the American naval officer who was in with the British prisoners at the bridge, they asked him how did he end up there, and he said he was off the Houston when the Houston sunk. And it's true that some of the survivors of the USS Houston did in fact build that railroad in Burma, Thailand, which was the genesis of that movie.
What's the mystery about the so-called buried treasure?
Well, the mystery is created by the fact that there is The Speaker of the House wants to deal with, the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Washington wants to deal